Good evening, everybody. It's 6 o'clock, and I want to make sure we're very prompt and respectful of everyone's time. So thank you for attending. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the emerald ash borer. My name is Chris Petrie. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Lakeville. With me tonight, we have a number of different folks here. We have Jennifer Burrington from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, who will be presenting. We also have Emily Ball, our city forester, next to her. And in the very back of the room that you were getting the handouts from is Hannah Tuomi, who is a Green Corps member that is a program through the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And she's been working with the city and will be working with us in our urban forestry area. So we have all these resources here for you this evening. A couple just housekeeping items besides welcoming you here this evening. Right outside the doors, hang a left if you need to use the restroom. There's a restroom there as well as a drinking fountain if you should need anything. And tonight we are actually videotaping this. So both Emily and Jennifer will go through some presentations. And if you could hold your questions, we're happy to answer any questions. If you could just hold them till the end so we can get through, so when we're able to put this out and post this for other folks, that we can get through the presentation for those that may be watching at a later date at home. All right? So welcome. Thank you for braving the cold weather today. If it would have been yesterday or even the day before, it would have been much nicer. But with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to start us off.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, again, I am Jennifer Burrington. I am a plant health specialist at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture out of the St. Paul office, and I have been working on emerald ash borer for about 6 years now. So I'm well versed in how to identify it and give you some information on it. So to start with, we are going to go over the life cycle of the insect. We will go through the host trees that they like. We will go through how to recognize the symptoms of emerald ash borer on your ash trees. We also go through the distribution, regulations related to ash wood and the insects, and management options that you have available to you, and then how to report if you have an ash tree that you suspect has emerald ash borer. And then we'll open it up for questions. So to start with, we will go through the life cycle here. Emerald ash borer is an iridescent green beetle. It's a metallic beetle that hangs out in the canopies of trees and does a little tiny bit of feeding on the leaves before mating. And then they lay their eggs on the top right picture there on the outside of the bark. They lay them in bark crevices. The eggs will hatch, they will become a larvae, and the larvae will burrow underneath the bark, and that's when they start making their S-shaped serpentine galleries that you may have noticed on the wood samples on your way in. The larvae go through a couple different stages of growth. They will then pupate in a little pupal chamber that they chew out in about a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch into the wood or a 1/4 of a 1/2 inch into the bark. And then they will complete their transformation and emerge as adult beetles through a D-shaped exit hole. These exit holes are very small. I would not suggest trying to find a D-shaped exit hole if you're really looking for one on your ash tree. There's some other symptoms that we'll talk about that are more noticeable before you see the holes. And then the cycle starts all over again. In Minnesota, emerald ash borer takes either 1 or 2 years to complete its life cycle. So to give you an example of a 2-year life cycle, one egg that was laid this summer is about halfway through its larval stage right now. It goes dormant over the winter. Next summer, it will complete its larval stage and will pupate and emerge 2 summers from now as an adult beetle. Does that make sense? Okay. So at any given time, you can have various life stages of the larvae underneath the bark. That's why on the bottom there, it shows a blue line all the way across every single month, because you could have larvae under there at any time. Adult beetles are usually active in the state sometime between May 1st and October 1st. We have to say this to cover the entire state. Southern Minnesota, you're going to see them closer to that May 1st date start emerging. In the metro, it's usually around the June-ish late May, early June-ish time that you'll start seeing them emerge. But in general, we say for our state, sometime between May 1st and October 1st, they are active. Can you save it till the end? Thank you. How does emerald ash borer kill a tree? It's the larvae underneath the bark that is cutting off the circulation of nutrients and water that the tree needs to survive. So you start with one larvae underneath the bark. The tree will try to heal around it and callus around it, but then eventually you end up with hundreds of larvae underneath the bark, cutting off all the circulation of nutrients and water. That tree on the right is from a tree down in Nodine, so southeast Minnesota. And we have a short video that we can have you watch on, oops.
So, what's the big deal about moving firewood?
Sometimes we move things we don't want, like emerald ash borer. The beetle larvae hatch from eggs and chew through bark. They feed on the wood and cut off the tree's nutrients. They live under the bark in winter, and when they come out in the spring as winged beetles, they can fly off and eat other ash trees. Emerald ash borer might seem like a small bug, but it's a big deal to Minnesota. Don't spread emerald ash borer. Burn firewood where you buy it.
So that's just an example of why it's very important not to move firewood, because you never know if there are those larvae underneath the bark. You could unintentionally bring them to another location and they would emerge the next year and start infesting the ash trees at that new location. Because we have almost 1 billion ash trees in Minnesota, so there's lots of food for it. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the host trees. The host tree for emerald ash borer is our ash trees. Ash trees are opposite branching. They have compound leaves and 5 to many leaflets. So when you look at the picture on the far right, that's actually one leaf, and all the individual smaller things that we would think of as leaves are leaflets. We have a handout in the back on ash tree identification and some of the lookalikes, some of the species that also have compound leaves that may be confused with ash trees. A little bit trickier to do tree ID in the winter, but even now with the leaves off the trees, you can look up into the canopy of your tree and look for opposite branching trees. And in Minnesota, our only opposite branching trees would be maple and ash. Those are the primary. Even look at them this week. So diving into the city of Lakeville ash population, we recently have completed some tree inventories throughout the city, and we now know the top 5 tree types in the parks are maple, spruce, ash, oak, and linden basswood. And of that, 18% are ash trees, so 18% of all the trees in the maintained areas of the parks are ash. The top 5 tree types on facilities like City Hall or the Art Center, as well as utility structures like water towers. The top 5 would be spruce, crabapple, pine, ash, and then juniper or red cedar. And of that, about 9% are ash trees. For right-of-ways are the areas just behind your curb, roughly 14 feet behind your curb, and that's a right-of-way easement that the city manages the trees in those areas, as well as their utilities and other things. We have the ability to use that area for street maintenance and street rebuilding. The trees in those areas, we have about 18% of all of the trees in the right-of-way are ash. And so diving into real numbers, these are just a few shots of ash trees throughout the city. These pictures are in your neighborhoods, along major corridors, and they help the ash trees contribute to the character of Lakeville. So looking specifically at city-owned ash trees, the right-of-ways, there are about 1,800 ash trees in the right-of-ways, about 688 ash trees in the maintained areas of the parks, and about 60 on city facility and utility sites. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, and she's going to talk to you about how to recognize EAB.
So there are about 4 main ways that we recognize emerald ash borer and confirm that it is actually emerald ash borer that's infesting your tree. The first would be, like I mentioned, that S-shaped, tight S back and forth gallery underneath the bark. If you happen to see a gallery, a partial gallery underneath the bark, please, if you have permission to peel the bark off further, take a look to see if you can see if it is an S shape. Emerald ash borer is the only insect in ash that will make that very tight S. There are many native species that kind of meander, kind of wavy lines, but nothing else makes the back and forth S shape. Also, if you happen to find a larvae underneath the bark, there are, like I mentioned, a lot of native insects that also attack ash trees. Emerald ash borer is the only insect in ash that has 2 urogomphi on the back end. They are spine-like projections on the back end. They look like little hairs or pincers. If you find a larvae, you can look on the back end to see if you see those 2 little urogomphi on it, and that would for sure determine that you have emerald ash borer in your tree. Also, if you happen to find a D-shaped exit hole, they are quite small, but if you happen to find one on an ash, it does mean that it is emerald ash borer. I tried to highlight how tiny that is on the slide there for you. And also, if you find an adult beetle flying around, if you pull the wing covers back, it will have like a ruby red underbody. So that's one way you can tell if you are looking at the correct green insect, because there are a lot of things that look like it. You might have noticed the handout that we have at the back of the room that has the common insects that look like emerald ash borer. And that would be the handout. A lot of people will mistake 6-spotted tiger beetles when they start emerging in the spring. They are fast-moving insects on the ground, and some people will mistake Japanese beetles for emerald ash borer. But this is just a helpful handout if you happen to find a green-colored insect. The signs and symptoms to look for on your ash tree. So this is kind of a general progression of symptoms on an average-sized ash tree, probably one that's about 12 to 15 inches in diameter, so a good mature tree. The first year that a tree is infested, there are just some of those very small larvae present. Remember I said that it's a 2-year life cycle, sometimes in Minnesota. So you just have those small larvae, and they are just starting their infestation. You can't tell any symptoms on the outside of the tree. They are just eating their way underneath the bark. The second year that a tree is infested, you're going to have some larger larvae, and you may have some insects that made it through the 1-year cycle of development. So you may have some adults emerging. I mentioned that they start their infestation in the top, mid to top canopy of the tree, where the branches are transitioning from smooth bark to slightly rough. So they're going to start up a ways. You might see some woodpecker damage. Woodpeckers like to eat insect larvae underneath the bark, whether it's an emerald ash borer or another native insect. So just because you see some woodpecker damage on an ash tree doesn't mean that it absolutely has emerald ash borer. It means something is going on, and it's worth further investigating if you can. So that second year, you might see 1 or 2 woodpecker holes on maybe 1 or 2 branches, up a ways. I don't suggest climbing trees as a habit. If you have a pair of binoculars, you can stand on the ground and look up with a pair of binoculars to see if you can scan the branches looking for woodpecker damage. The third year a tree is infested, you're going to have some more woodpecker damage, probably on a couple different branches, probably a couple spots on each of those branches. You also have some bark splits happening. So bark splits are when the first larvae that infests the tree will try to heal around that and callus off that area. And as the branch keeps growing, the bark will crack open because it is no longer attached to the wood because of that larval gallery underneath there. So it will crack open, and with a pair of binoculars, you may be able to see that S-shaped gallery in that bark crack as it's opening. So that's the third year. And on the left, you can see that over time, there's always more and more larvae. There's more and more females walking down the tree, laying their eggs in those bark crevices. So there's exponentially more and more insects that are underneath the bark that are eating away at the tree. So the 4th year, that's when you finally start to see some canopy symptoms. And it's a general thinning. It's not an outright dead branch. It's just a general thinning of the leaves. So one year your tree might look full and healthy, and the next year it doesn't look as full maybe as it did the year before. It's hard to distinguish those minor changes in the canopy. But 4th year is usually when you start to see some symptoms in the canopy. And then 5th, 6th, and 7th year, your tree is on its way out, and there's probably no helping it. Dead trees become very hazardous. They are very brittle when ash trees die, regardless of if it's emerald ash borer or another insect or disease. So if you can, try to remove them before they become completely dead, because they are quite hazardous and they will just start dropping their branches. So that's on average how an infestation goes over the years. If you have a higher population of emerald ash borer in the area, it'll go in a shorter amount of time. If you have a lower population of emerald ash borer in the area, you could maybe spread it out to a few more years. But on average, it's about 5 to 7 years. Now to talk more about the woodpecker damage that we see before we see the canopy symptoms. Like I mentioned, it occurs in the mid to top canopy of the tree, usually that 3 to 6 inch diameter branch, where the bark transitions from smooth to rough. And then there's usually when a woodpecker goes for a larvae underneath the bark, they will create a lighter patch as they are pecking at the wood. It'll slough off some of that outer bark, so there will be a light patch that you can see with a naked eye. You don't need a pair of binoculars to see that. So if you see those blonding areas, you can take out a pair of binoculars and look to see if there is a hole from the woodpecker getting an actual larvae underneath the bark. You're going to look for dime-sized, light-colored, and ovalish shaped holes. I say light-colored because emerald ash borer is right underneath the bark, and more of the native insects go deeper into the wood. And so the woodpecker has to make a deeper hole so it will be shadowed and it will be dark-colored. So that's why I say light-colored. And about dime size, sometimes the woodpeckers go a little bit crazy and they get some larger holes as well. So here's some pictures. Like I mentioned, on the left there, you can see that lighter, the bark sloughing off. There you can see that, and then you could investigate and go closer to it, and you could see that there's actually holes there from the woodpeckers getting the larvae. And that's the nice close-up pictures on the left of that small dime-sized hole, and then on the right, it's a little bit larger. If you can tell, there is a S-shaped gallery in the woodpecker hole that you can see. You might not be able to see it too well, but it's horizontal lines indicating that the larvae has been eating a tunnel underneath there. Here are some of the bark splits. The one on the left is a little bit easier to see than the one on the right. But that occurs about that 3rd year of infestation. And to talk a little bit about the native damage, the native insects don't usually occur in that mid to top canopy of the tree. They will usually occur on the trunk or the lower canopy. So if you happen to see things on the main stem of the tree or in the lower canopy, please look up as well to see if you see symptoms in the mid to top canopy as well. Because if it's emerald ash borer and it's on the trunk, it'll be up in the mid to top canopy as well. Native insects will also go for dead branches already. So if the branch has already been dead, you may get some of the bark beetles and other insects going for it. These are some other exit holes and some other damage. The ones in the middle on the top there is from a clearwing borer. It's a completely circular hole that a lot of people will see on the trunks. And then you have larger holes that the woodpeckers are going for. Other insects are making nesting cavities. And then some other ones on the right. So the distribution, This would be a map from the USDA keeps track of emerald ash borer in the US. All of these red dots are the initial detections in each of those counties. The green represents the native range of ash, and the blue area is the quarantine boundary, which I will talk about in just a minute. I like to point out on the left there, they did not fly a couple hundred, I think it's like 300 to 500 miles on their own to Colorado. It was most likely brought there by somebody unintentionally moving firewood that was infested with some larvae that emerged and started infesting the trees there. It's another reason why we really like to emphasize don't move the wood. On the right is a zoomed in Minnesota map there. You can see in red, those are all the quarantined counties, and in green is a generally infested area, which I will talk about in a minute. We do have on our website a status map that we update every night with any new trees that we find. So we are out looking, we have private tree care companies out looking, cities are out looking constantly, so they send in reports to us, and we upload them each night. So it is a pretty much live map, and it's the mda.state.mn.us/EAB status, and that is just a snapshot of what it looks like on the bottom there. You can type in your address on the left, and then in the top right of the browser, you will see that there's a ruler tool that you can figure out how close the closest known infested tree is to your location. If you want to find out if there's one close, if you have a cabin somewhere, find out how close it is to there, you can do that as well. And here's a zoomed in map. Again, this is our online map. You can see that there are individual marks for each of the trees. And then the green area is what we consider the generally infested area. Emerald ash borer on its own maybe spreads about a half mile to 2 miles a year. So we set a buffer around all of the known infested trees, and given your proximity to a infested tree, if you have a tree in that area, there's a high likelihood it could already have emerald ash borer in it, and you may not know it yet. It may be that first year of infestation or that second year. So this is a tool that people can use to see if they need to make management decisions now. If they are in that generally infested area, they should decide what they would like to do with their ash tree now. Or if they are close to it, they should also be deciding. And if they are farther away, they may be able to wait a little bit longer. But in general, it's in Lakeville now. It's going to be spreading throughout the city slowly. So with that slow spread, some of the factors that have helped Minnesota, it's about the only time you want to be below average as a state. We are below average for the number of counties that we have emerald ash borer in compared to the national average. So we should be at almost half of our counties should have emerald ash borer based on other states and how emerald ash borer is going in other states. Some of the things that have helped us are the cold weather. Emerald ash borer will die if they will freeze. It has to be -29 is what they have to reach, and that's air temperature. Even on those windy days in that polar vortex that we had, we got down to about -24, and we had 60 to 70% of the larvae die from the cold that year. But it wasn't cold enough to get rid of all the larvae. Education, we like to share what we know and educate people on what to look for. Outreach efforts, there are many different efforts on how not to move firewood, buy it where you burn it, and other aspects with that. We have aggressive management by cities. Initial city detections are usually removed and processed, good sanitation practices, and then we have quarantines in place. Quarantines prevent the movement of wood outside of the counties. So in our state, all of the red counties on our maps are quarantined for emerald ash borer, which means you cannot move any ash, you cannot move any emerald ash borer, and you cannot move any hardwood firewood. Hardwood firewood is considered 4 feet in length or less of any hardwood species, so any deciduous species. That is to prevent emerald ash borer from moving throughout our state faster than it would naturally. We have to say all hardwood firewood because the average person cannot tell from a cut pile of firewood what species of deciduous tree that firewood came from. Sometimes if there's bark on there, you can tell. A lot of times there might not be. So we have to make it a general all hardwood firewood. If you ever have questions about quarantines, you can always contact the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and we can help you explain what you would need to do if you are looking to move firewood outside of those quarantined areas. You can legally move from northern Chisago County all the way down to Iowa as long as you stay within quarantined counties. However, I don't suggest ever moving wood that far. You should be able to find somebody to source some wood much closer to where your final destination is. And again, any new finds that we have will be updated on our map, like the Martin County find that was this summer. And I'll pass it over to Emily for management.
Thank you. All right, so many of you may have heard some of the initial management recommendations when EAB was first found in Minnesota in 2009. It was at that time a newer pest to the country, and there was a lot of management taking place kind of ahead of where the science was. Since that initial find in Minnesota, there has been a lot of research dedicated to emerald ash borer in terms of what is the most effective management of this pest. Unfortunately, we still don't have anything to completely eradicate it once it's been established in an area, but we do have some good tools. One of the best management practices, if you are in an area with emerald ash borer, is being mindful of the calendar. Jennifer talked about the life cycle and when emerald ash borer is active. So generally, May 2nd through September 30th is a time when you wouldn't want to do ash pruning or remove an ash tree. That's the time of year that EAB is active, and you would be potentially inadvertently moving around this insect. So October 1st through May 1st would be the EAB dormant period when if you had pruning to do on an ash tree or you wanted to remove an ash tree in your yard, that would be the ideal time. During that time period, you could remove, say, small trees in your yard, and you could potentially use the wood on site in a small fire pit or some sort of use in your home for the firewood. But again, anything that you don't use by that end date of May 1st, you should dispose of properly. We have provided a handout in the back of the room on some options for wood disposal close to Lakeville. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture also has a more extensive list on their website. And the deal with those disposal options would be they're either burning the wood for energy, or they'd be processing with a chipper that would cut the wood and brush into ideally no bigger than 1 inch by 1 inch in 2 directions to destroy the EAB larva. So in terms of property owner management options, so this varies a little bit depending on how much land you have. If you're here representing a townhome association or a larger property like a church or a school, something like that, that's a little bit different than an individual homeowner with a smaller lot. But essentially, removals would be one option. So you could first identify which trees are ash in your yard, and you could remove before they have emerald ash borer, or if you start seeing woodpecker damage, you could remove them. Or if you already have dead ash trees, or if they die. Now again, like Jennifer mentioned, when the ash trees are dying from emerald ash borer, they become very dry and brittle. In some of the states where they had to remove trees that were very infested and were partially dead, they're so brittle that they're unsafe for people, arborists and tree workers to remove. And so, they're trying to cut them and drop them, but the branches are breaking and falling down on the tree workers. So as the trees die, they become more hazardous to remove, which means they'll be more expensive to remove. Another option would be treatments. So you could opt to, treatments with insecticides, and you could opt to do the insecticide treatments before you have emerald ash borer in the tree, or you could potentially wait until you start seeing a little bit of woodpecker damage. The general threshold is if 30% or greater of your canopy is affected by emerald ash borer, it's not worth treating anymore. And the tricky part about emerald ash borer is by the time you start seeing those visual symptoms, they're pretty heavily infested. And again, they're damaging the living tissue network underneath the bark. And that is the same mechanism that disperses the insecticides throughout the tree. So one con of waiting is that you're already going to have some damage to the tissues that you need to function to protect the tree. So it's a pro and con there. And then do nothing. There's still, I talk to a lot of people who still think that it's okay to just wait until the tree is dying or dead, or there isn't anything you can do to manage this pest, and that's not true. And so I say do nothing is a false option, because eventually you'll probably have to deal with it. And as you wait, your management choices decrease. Your ability to inject or treat the tree another way, your options will decrease, and then your option to remove the tree, the people who are going to be available to remove the tree is going to decrease. If the tree becomes very hazardous, there might be certain companies who don't want to remove it. So in terms of the city managing it, the way that a city manages a population of like a community forest or urban forest would be different than you, an individual homeowner. But we're managing, all of the city-owned trees, so parks and right-of-ways and city properties like City Hall, that kind of thing. So we are going to take an even more broad approach. So number one is education and outreach, so doing these sorts of presentations. I will also be doing inspections of suspicious ash, so you can call during the growing season if you see a tree that has woodpecker activity, and I can inspect it. So that would be an aspect. And then presentations and booths in the community. So we'll be at some of the different community events throughout the upcoming years, and then available in 2018 for doing smaller group presentations to homeowners associations and groups if you have an interest in that. In terms of ordinances, we don't have an ordinance right now to regulate what is going to happen with emerald ash borer. There are many cities now that require the removal of infested ash trees from private land. That's something that will be considered in our management toolbox in the upcoming year. Policies. So some of the policies we're looking at are just encouraging species diversity on in our parks in terms of when we're replanting. And then we have a tree sale program. I'm not sure how many people have heard of, but we do have a tree sale program that happens in the winter and the spring. The pickup is in the spring. So really looking at what do our inventories say, what do we have out there, and how can we increase diversity in the community so private property owners can continue to build their canopy. Some other policies might be changing timing for all of our in-house ash work. So it might be, skipping ash tree pruning if it's not a safety issue. Obviously, if there's going to be there's a safety issue around an ash tree, we're going to do it even if EAB is active, because human safety is number one, and just manage that wood appropriately. And then this is just actually the trees in this picture are honey locust trees, but it's a good example that we would want to favor removal for a tree unless we think it's going to be worth investing in from a treatment standpoint. So, if these were ash trees underneath power lines, would we continue to prune them? No, we'd probably favor them for removal. So in terms of removals, we'll be structuring some removals and doing a percentage each year on city property. Even before they're infested or showing signs of infestation. So What would drive that is our tree inventory and then our inspections. So if it's a poor condition or a fair condition tree, we would consider removal. Not all fair condition trees will be removed. So the things we're looking at are there large wounds in the tree? Is there storm damage? Is it growing near power lines? Is it, does it have some other underlying issues that make it not worth investing in for treatment? And then replacements. So we would be replacing trees as we're removing them as much as possible, as much as the budget allows, on parks and city facilities, so like City Hall or the Arts Center. And again, promoting diverse tree species. And then the last option for management would be treatments. And so again, that's insecticides. There are a number of insecticides, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But ideally, we'll be treating before a tree is showing signs of emerald ash borer. But again, based on budget and based on final numbers. And then hoping to offer some sort of homeowner bulk treatment program. A lot of cities have offered that as well to their residents. What that entails is if the city does treatments on city property, we would also request a quote from a contractor for a homeowner price. And then we would be able to pass along that savings to residents. So that's something that a lot of cities have done, and it's been very successful and allows residents to have, an easy option. So when you're considering insecticides, there are a lot of different variables, and I've done a lot of inspections prior. I've been here for a little over a year. Prior to this time, I was in another city, and the general trend that I got from a lot of homeowners was, well, what should I do? Which should I choose? Should I inject? Should I do the soil treatment? And really, there are a lot of different variables to consider. Number one, how close is EAB? Well, we know it's here in Lakeville now, and we know that the northeast part of Lakeville is considered generally infested. So even if you can't see damage on your ash tree, good chance that it's probably already there. It's just at low enough levels that we can't detect it. So that would be a check in terms of if you're going to consider insecticides, you're definitely location-wise, it's appropriate to think about it. Again, how healthy is the tree? Health and physical condition are two variables that you'd be looking at. You'd be looking for a lot of the structural issues that I mentioned. You might also have underlying issues with the health of the tree. It could be chlorotic. It could have an insect issue, something like that, another insect issue other than emerald ash borer. So you're making an evaluation on that regard. And then how large is the tree? Is it a tree that you could remove and replace and recapture those years, or is it large enough that you'd never see a tree that large in your yard? The other variable is how many ash trees do you have in your yard? Do you have other trees that are providing shade, or is it the only shade tree in your yard? And then another thing to consider in terms of which insecticide to use would be where is the tree in relation to any water body? Is it within 25 feet of a wetland or a swale or a stream or a lake or a storm drain? Those all convey water, and there are ramifications there. And then how important is the tree? I've looked at thousands of ash trees, and by the end of a day of looking at ash trees, I end up thinking, none of these are really that great. But it's where is it, and does it have significance to you? So sometimes it's a memorial tree, or it's a tree you planted when you first moved into the house, or in a park, there are only ash trees, maybe shading an area where a lot of kids play. So how important is it? So insecticide treatments, in terms of considering the risks, there's a great handout in the back for you to take home and take a look at and consider your options. A lot of people have questions about how do the insecticides impact pollinators. If you have those questions, you can ask those at the end. I'm not going to dive into that in too much detail here. But in general, the injections would not impact pollinators as much as the soil drench or the soil injections. And there are some nuances there. And then we talked about the distance to a water body. And then treatments need to be repeated. So depending on the insecticide you choose, it may have to be done yearly, or it may have to be done every other year. There's still, again, like I said, with the science emerging, there's a lot of research indicating that some of the treatments actually could be done every 3 years. And there are some cities that are actually doing them every 3 years because of budgetary constraints. So there's a lot of nuances there as well. And then timing is everything. You want to make sure that you're applying the insecticide, or that the company that you've hired is applying the insecticide at the appropriate time so it's doing what you need it to do to protect your tree. So again, what types? It goes into a lot of detail in the handout that we provided, but in general, there are canopy sprays, there are stem injections, and there are soil injections or soil drenches. In general, the city, on city property, will favor stem injections on trees that are 10 inches in diameter or larger that would stay inside the tree. So cost, that's a huge question that a lot of people have. So I just ran through an example on the screen. Let's say you choose to do a stem injection of emamectin benzoate. So that's the chemical name. A specific name would be triage, if you've heard of that before. So the amount that you inject into the tree is based on the stem, the diameter of the stem or the trunk, and there are different rates. So that can make it tricky if you're getting estimates. You always want to ask what is the rate that they're dosing your tree. So medium to high would be appropriate rates if you're in an infested area. So without a bulk treatment program, a typical 12-inch tree, ash tree, would cost between $96 and $120. So it's about 8 to 10 inches per diameter inch. And with a bulk treatment program, a 12-inch tree would cost between $66 and $81, or $550 to $675 a diameter inch. So those are current prices for 2017. Prices change, markets change, and that kind of thing. But that just kind of gives you a ballpark in terms of, maybe you have a tree in mind that you're thinking about. I've found that it seems like people just want to know, is it under 1,000 or over 1,000, ballpark. So pretty affordable. In terms of the insecticide treatments, one thing that I have had a lot of questions about are the soil treatments that you can buy at a store. So the brand name that's most common is Bayer Tree and Shrub, I think. It's imidacloprid. And the tricky part is that if your tree is above 14 to 15 inches in diameter, so diameter on the back of the homeowner insecticide sheet and on this screen, the diameter really is the cross section of the tree. So if I'm looking down, let's say the tree's been removed and I'm looking down at the stem, the diameter is really the cross section. So you can measure the circumference and then divide it by 3.14 and get the diameter. In any case, if it's above 15 inches in diameter or 48 inches in circumference, your tree is too big for the homeowner formulation that you can buy in those stores. The concentration will not be high enough, and it will not protect your tree from emerald ash borer. The other tricky part about a lot of the soil treatments are that it has to make soil contact. So you have to remove any mulch, you have to remove any grass, or any other ground covers that are adjacent to your tree. And then now I'm going to switch it over to Jennifer, and she's going to talk a little bit about how insecticides work and finish us off.
Thank you. So Emily went through a little bit about the handout. If it's the only thing that you read, please do read it. It goes through everything very nicely, how to decide if your tree is something that you should protect. I will just briefly mention how insecticides work. The insecticides that are used to treat emerald ash borer are usually ones that are systemic, so they are applied directly, in the most part, when it's a mature tree, into the trunk, and they are going up the xylem, and they're going into the leaves. The main focus of the insecticides is to get into the leaves, to get the adults that are feeding on the leaves. As an added bonus, as the insecticide is going up the xylem, the emerald ash borer larvae are in the phloem, which is right next to the xylem, and so they will get a dose as well. So you are getting both the adults and you are getting the larvae. So it is protecting the tree completely. That is how most of the ones that you would be interested in using are going to work. With the feeding damage that I talked about that emerald ash borer does before they mate, it's very, very minor damage. You're not going to notice. It's not like Japanese beetle that skeletonizes the leaves. It's very, very minor damage. And then we have some other programs at the Department of Agriculture that we are doing to help with emerald ash borer. So in forested environments, where there aren't a lot of options for management, when you have kind of a thick forest, it's not easy to get in there with chainsaws and equipment to remove trees without damaging other trees. You also can't apply chemicals to the trees, usually because they're in a wet environment and there's just so many of them in an area. So what we have for forested environments are biological control agents. So these are parasitoid wasps. Yes, they are wasps. They are very, very, very teeny tiny. They are in the back display that you can take a look at. They're very, very small. They are not going to sting humans. What they do is they parasitize the eggs and the larvae of the emerald ash borer. So these wasps are native predators of emerald ash borer that have been reared here in the United States and released in areas that have known populations of emerald ash borer. These wasps went through very extensive testing. They only go after emerald ash borer, and they have to have emerald ash borer to complete their life cycle. So we can't pre-release them in an environment. We have to wait for emerald ash borer to show up in forested areas, and then we release these. So these help keep the populations down a little bit so they don't exponentially grow. So the one on the top there is the egg parasitoid. The two on the bottom are larval parasitoids. So these wasps will lay their eggs in an emerald ash borer egg or an emerald ash borer larvae. The wasp egg will hatch and consume the emerald ash borer. So yay, wasps, going for those emerald ash borers. We have a program, and we have released hundreds of thousands of these wasps in known areas. I believe it's since 2010 or 2011. On that interactive map on our website, you can zoom in to see the areas that we have done releases at. So now that it's in the Lakeville area, we will be scouting for new areas that are large tracts of forest land that have a high percentage of ash to do releases of these insects to help manage the population. In Michigan, they have seen, now that emerald ash borer has kind of gone through most of Michigan, they are seeing up to about 50% parasitism using these parasitoid wasps of emerald ash borer. So it is a long-term tool that we can use to help keep the populations lower so that our ash can last a little bit longer. We also have a biosurveillance program that the University of Minnesota is also running. It's called Wasp Watchers. There is a native wasp that we have called the smoky winged beetle bandit wasp, or Cerceris fumipennis. It is a ground nesting solitary wasp that goes after adult metallic wood-boring beetles. So it would go after emerald ash borer adult beetles. These wasps go out, paralyze their prey, if it's an emerald ash borer beetle, bring it back to their nest site and put it in there for their young. They're very docile insects. If you would have a group of people, you can have a volunteer site. They like sandy, hard compacted soils, so a lot of times that's going to be baseball fields. The fields that are kind of neglected, maybe not mowed as often, are the ones that they kind of prefer. And in the summer, you can go out, like this person down here, with a net, go out on nice summer, nice warm days at about noon, and go out and catch these insects, and they will drop their prey, and you can easily identify if it's emerald ash borer or another insect. So you can tell if emerald ash borer is in the area. They are very efficient at finding emerald ash borer if it's in the area. So we have found these, bringing back emerald ash borer adults to their nest sites in the Twin Cities metro area. So if you're interested in that, there's also information on the Wasp Watchers website through the university. And then how to report pictures, or how to report suspected trees. Please take pictures and notes. We're getting very good at identifying based on pictures if it's emerald ash borer or not. If you happen to capture the insect or you have a larvae that you found in the tree, snap a picture of it, save it. We can come and take a look at it. And then please report it to Emily Ball, the city forester here. Otherwise, you can use an app that we have. It's actually a free app For the Great Lakes Early Detection Network, you can report in any aquatic or terrestrial invasive species, so not just emerald ash borer. You can report oriental bittersweet, you can report buckthorn, you can report zebra mussels, anything you would like to report in, it's going to be on that app. It is a large app because it does give you, embedded in it, it has pictures of what you should be looking for. So if you think you've found emerald ash borer using that app, you can see the pictures of what it should look like. So that's another way, and that comes directly to the Department of Agriculture here in Minnesota, and we can look at it and easily tell if it's emerald ash borer or not, and if it's something that we suspect and it's in Lakeville, we would contact Emily to come take a look for sure. And that's it. I'd like to open it up for questions now. Yes?
You mentioned that the preferred method of treatment is injecting into the stem or the trunk. Does that mean that you prefer that over canopy spray?
So I would say from really targeting the pest that you're trying to control, the stem injection would be more effective. There are some reasons that people use the spray, but that would be targeting, that would hit, that could potentially impact pollinators and other non-target species, so.
Yes.
Some material from one of the vendors in the area. They said just pour it around, you know, and so forth, a big enough tree, measure it. He said that would not be effective on a very large tree. I haven't seen anything happen to the tree, but you know, if I continue to do that, and the tree would become more anti-bug, or
So the question is, using a homeowner product that's purchased over the counter and applying it yourself to your tree on a large tree. It'll work, but it's not going to completely protect the tree. I have seen in other cities a homeowner that has treated using that on a very, very large tree, over 20 inches in diameter, and it had maybe a few less woodpecks than the tree next to it that wasn't treated. So if you have a large tree and you are going to invest in it and you are going to protect it, I highly recommend using a professional to treat it, and usually the professionals will use the trunk injection method, which will distribute the chemical and completely protect the tree.
One of the issues with the professional application of the soil treatment is that there's a per use limit based on the acre, like the acreage. And so if you have some really large trees, you reach the limit for that insecticide, and that's sort of driven the market to the stem injections as well.
If you're going to treat, say, the larger trees, maybe 10, 12 inches trees, and you do it every 1 or 2 years, whatever it happens to be, how long can that work to protect the tree as far as its survival?
So the question was, if you do opt to inject a tree that's 10, 12 inches in diameter or larger, and you do it, typically the injections are, depending on which insecticide you use, it could be every year, every other year, how long does it work to protect the tree? And so, Jennifer, if you've heard something different, but my understanding, and from what I've seen, the injection sites are very small, and so the tree seals over those wounds usually within a season, and so you can continue to inject that tree as it grows, and so as long as you treat it, it should be protected. Once you stop treating it, it won't be protected anymore.
Yes.
Up next to my garden with an ash tree, if I get it treated, will it have an effect on the garden?
So the question is, his tree is next to a garden. Will it have an effect on the garden if he gets it treated? Not if you use a trunk injection method. It's when you apply things to the soil that other plants can also get that chemical from the soil and affect the plants in the garden and other things in your yard. So if you have a tree that's next to a garden, I highly suggest using a chemical that is a trunk injection method.
Twofold question. If you use the injection method and you ultimately, hopefully, never get the emerald ash borer, are you harming the tree in any way just by doing it? And if it's seeping into the soil, is it getting into the grass? And would it affect my grass-eating dogs?
So the question was, if you do the trunk or stem injection, basically, well, I'll answer the second part of your question. Will it seep into the soil and affect your grass-eating dogs? So, I guess the first part of the question is, does it harm the tree? So the first part of the question, if the injection is done properly, it should not harm the tree. The holes are very small, and the tree, like a pruning cut, if you can think about the size of a pruning cut. By the way, the ideal size of a pruning cut should be 2 inches in diameter or smaller. But if you think about a pruning cut and you think about a drill, that's basically what they're using for this injection at the base of the tree. Very small holes, they seal over generally within a year. Now, if the company doesn't know what they're doing, or if they do the drill, the holes too high, or they blow out the cambium, then you could get a little bit of decay in the area around where they drilled. If they're doing it properly, it should seal over in a season, and it wouldn't be hurting the tree. So the second part about the dog. Again, if they're applying the insecticide properly, they would be monitoring it. So basically they're drilling the holes, they're putting in the plugs, or if they have a plugless system, they have a network of tubing, and the tree is taking up the insecticide into the canopy, so it should stay inside the tree itself, and it shouldn't be seeping. There is another document that I don't have printed, but it talks about, how much insecticide, if any, is in the leaf material and that kind of thing, but should not be.
Any regulations or anything for these people that come around cutting trees?
I had an ash tree removed last summer. I'm 100% convinced it was emerald ash borer. It had all the symptoms, matched all the pictures, plus it had new growth right up the very bottom of the tree, which they said was symptom also. But the guy come in, and then he subcontracted it out to somebody from St. Paul, no licenses. Lakeville doesn't require any license or any inspection of these guys. Another guy, then he is going to get rid of the wood for me, so he gets a couple of yuppies with a great big pickup truck. They couldn't lift the wood to get it in their truck for a backyard fire. So somebody from Farmington comes and gets it. He splits it in the street and takes it to Farmington, and we'll sell it and bring it back to Lakeville probably, or move the ash borer over to Lakeville. I did not see any larvae. I didn't see any ash borers, but I had the D right at eye level, looking right straight at it. A lot of woodpecker holes around it, and the bark's falling off in an area about that big, and I had the essence. So it was a perfect example, and I didn't know the city even had a forest.
Yep, so the question was, are there any regulations for tree care companies? Yes, there are. Every entity that does work on trees in the state of Minnesota is required to have a license with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. It's a tree care registry license. You can look on our Department of Agriculture website to see if they have a license. You can also give us a call and we can look them up for you. They should have that. If they are treating your tree, they should also have a pesticide applicator license, which again is provided by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. They will also be able to look, you should be able to look that up online as well. So if you're having it removed, they should be on the tree care registry. If you're having it treated, they should also be most likely on the tree care registry, because if they're treating trees, they're probably doing some pruning as well. So it's easy to look up if they are on there or not. If you happen to find a company that is not on those, doesn't have a pesticide applicator license or doesn't have a tree care registry license, please let us know and we will investigate it further.
Well, this got to be around again in the spring.
Yep.
Driving through my neighborhood, because I have a lot of ash trees in the neighborhood. My neighbor has 22 of them, and so he'll be snooping around, but he won't lift a finger to cut one, but he'll get your deposit.
Yep.
And he'll show you a fancy piece of paper saying he's licensed, bonded, and insured. But I called down here and they said, no, they're not required to have a license in Lakeville.
So one of the tricky parts, some cities, in addition to the state requirements, some cities also license in addition. At this time, the city of Lakeville does not require an additional license in addition to the state tree registry, but there are many cities around this area that do.
Correct.
How long does the process of injecting the insecticide take?
So the question was, how long does the process of injecting the insecticide take? And it really depends on, so the two main insecticides that are being used right now for trunk injection are the emamectin benzoate, or Triage is one of the brand names, as well as triazin. And so the emamectin benzoate is pretty quick. Again, it's just making sure you pull back that soil, finding the root flare, injecting around the base, or doing your drill holes. The tricky part is making sure it's on a good day. So if it's a sunny, warm day, maybe a little bit of a breeze, then you've got a lot of water loss happening from the top of the canopy, and that it's called transpirational pull. Basically, it pulls the insecticide up into the canopy of the tree. If you have an overcast, rainy day, there's not going to be as much happening, and it may take longer for that insecticide to fully disperse in the tree. But typically, an hour or so, depending on.
Were there tubes? I remember the Dutch elm disease when they were treated, they had tubes running into the trunk for days and weeks.
Okay.
Is this like that, or is it just a one-shot deal?
It's a lot faster. Yeah, so like an hour or less on average. Triazin is an organic, it's a different sort of pesticide, and that one takes longer, a little longer. Emamectin benzoate.
They are listed on the second page of the insecticide handout. Yep, there's a nice graph in there that tells you what the chemical name is, the common names, how to apply it, when to apply it, how often, everything like that. It's nicely laid out. Yes?
Three-part question. You mentioned potentially a bulk discount for, should the city decide to choose a provider to treat some of the city trees and have them passed along. Timing on that decision as to when you would make that decision and make that available, do you have any idea for that is the first question, I guess?
So if it is going to be offered in 2018, we would know by the growing season. So the treatments are usually done June through September. So it would be in time for that June date. So.
Part is short of that, do you have any preferred, do you recommend, other than the tree care registry you talked about, do you have any preferred providers that you could pass along? If at this point I'm kind of thinking insurance is the best plan, just do it just in case. But wondering, if you would recommend anybody. And then the third piece, I apologize, I came in 5 minutes late. Is this presentation available anywhere that we can access it? This one you've shown tonight.
Yeah, so, do you want
I can take the last one here for the presentation. This will be available on the city's website. The full presentation I don't have online. However, our website, we do have pretty much every aspect of the presentation on our Department of Agriculture Emerald Ash Borer page in some way, shape, or form. And then preferred vendors for insecticide treatments. From a state standpoint, I can't say any one in particular. It's best to get multiple quotes, to compare them, find somebody that's responsible. If you feel that they are trustworthy, they are licensed, they are on the tree care registry, they have a pesticide applicator license, that is the best recommendations that we can make. Some companies will kind of fly by night and kind of sneak in and things like that. They may not be able to offer as high of a quality service, which you will see sometimes in their prices, but the tree might not be completely protected. So make sure that you're getting what you need.
Yeah, try not to go with someone who's going door to door, if at all possible. That would be a key aspect. And similar from a city perspective, I can't give specific recommendations. I also, I think I'm going to actually put a PDF. The city has an EAB webpage if you go onto the city's webpage, so I can put I should be able to put a PDF of this presentation, as well as if you want to watch it all over again, it's being taped.
Thank you. Yes.
In terms of history, looking east where they've had it for years and years, does this run its course, or does it, after they've sort of consumed all the trees they're going to consume that haven't been protected, do they then run out of ash trees? Do they die, or what happens, long term? Or are they here forever?
So the question is asking about historically areas that have seen it move through already. Michigan would be where it was first detected in the United States. It has gone through an initial wave through that area, and all of the ash trees that have died, any that are left are resprouting, and emerald ash borer is going after those as they get large enough. So emerald ash borer needs the tree to be about 1 inch in diameter to complete its life cycle. So that's really not that big. So looking forward, a lot of researchers are moving towards an initial wave is going to come through, but emerald ash borer is going to stay in the environment, just maybe not as high of a population level as that first initial wave that comes through our state. So it's always going to be around. At this time, there is nothing that will completely eradicate the insect, so we don't have any way to for sure get rid of it all. So it's going to stick around. As time goes forward, you may be able to stretch those treatments out. If the population goes down of emerald ash borer, you may be able to get a few more years, 1 or 2 more years out of the treatments. So you may be able to lower those treatment numbers. But again, we don't know exactly how it's going to play out in Minnesota. We can look to other states, but there are a lot of things that we are doing, and we are catching it earlier on, so we have more options available to us to help manage the population. Yes?
Is there any way you can obtain those chemicals? I have 15 trees to treat. Can I get that chemical bulk, or do you need a license to get that? Or training to be able to use that? How would you suggest going after that?
Yep, so the question is looking at bulk use of a chemical. Can a private homeowner get the product that would be necessary to treat a lot of large mature trees? You would have to get a pesticide applicator license to purchase usually the products that you would need for those large trees. So that is something you can look into. The University of Minnesota and the Minnesota Department of Agriculture provide the training or study materials for that, and you can take the test for that. Because you have 15 trees, you could divide it up. You don't have to treat them all at once. There are studies out that there is some herd immunity if you treat a certain percentage of trees in a small forested area, that the trees next to it will be protected as well. So that is an option why I say you could divide it up, because if you skip a year, the other trees that you treated in the other year would possibly help you. But yes, you would need a pesticide applicator license to purchase a product that would be strong enough for mature trees.
Just to follow up on earlier when I talked about this infestation just kind of started out east and moving this way. Are there any broader type programs or best practices that maybe federal or state governments are trying to look at to eradicate the beetle itself, so it's not so much an individual type fight? Is there a broader look of a state government, I guess in this case the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, to eradicate the beetle?
So the question is, are there any programs to eradicate the insect? From a state government standpoint, they did try that in the beginning. In Michigan, they tried to get rid of all the ash material in an area, but emerald ash borer, like I mentioned, is underneath the bark of the tree, and you don't always know it's in those trees. They can also fly. They can also fly up to 5 miles on their own. So even if you cut every single ash tree in a 5-mile radius, it could still reach that one that's 5.01 miles away and infest that area and keep going. So there are no large-scale eradication eradication programs. The programs that we have in place are our best management practices. We recommend that you don't do any tree work in the summer when the adult beetles are active. We also have the biological control agents, the parasitoid wasps that I mentioned. We are doing that as a program, and that is kind of more broad, long-term, helping out with keeping that population lower.
I think up here and I think we'll take a few more questions, and then I want to be respectful of everyone's time because it's 10 after 7, but go ahead.
I had some wind damage in my trees. I had to have some of the limbs cut by professionals if it was up too high. And I guess the question would be is if I do injections, because it's a fairly big tree, do I need to do anything with those cut off areas up on those branches or whatever, or does that make it better just to leave them alone and do the injection and not worry about it?
So you already had the storm. The question was, he had some storm damage on an ash in the upper canopy, had a tree removal company take off the branches. So your question is, do you need to? Oh, the branch, you have the brush in your yard? Is that?
No, he's going to treat the tree, and so does he have to do anything with the cutoff area?
Oh, the wound, like where, okay. So the answer would be no. The tree will seal off as much of that wound as it can over time. So, and I think there was one back here, and then maybe we'll take this one, and then we'll call it, and then afterwards, if people have individual questions, you can come up.
So we live in a townhome association. We're known to have 45 ash trees. Right now, they appear to be healthy. If we were to treat our trees, but the communities around us did not, so we become an island, or that, I mean, is there some point at which it doesn't make sense to treat trees because no one else chooses to do that?
So the question is, he's in a large townhome association where there are about 45 ash trees. Does it make sense to treat their trees if people around them are not treating? And the treatment is an insecticide, so it kills emerald ash borer, and so as long as you're protecting your individual trees, that mechanism will work to kill insects on those trees. You will have higher, if you have a lot of dying, heavily infested trees nearby, you'll want to use probably the high rate of the insecticide, but you'll have control on your individual trees, as long as it's being done right.
So one thing that you could think about doing if you have multiple trees on your property is using the insecticide treatments to maintain that tree canopy and those benefits that the trees are providing you while you wait for other trees to grow and replace those ash trees at a later date. So using the treatments to kind of fill that gap in the time it takes for another tree to grow large enough to give you those benefits. And at a later date, much later down the road, you could look at removing those ash trees because you will have other trees in place that are going to provide those services to you. So that is one option that you can look at doing. So you'll maintain what you have and also looking towards the future, also maintaining it in the future.
So there's one more question, I think, here, and then we'll afterwards talk.
Just to follow up to this discussion earlier, if you have some damage, you've taken some branches off, you're unsure whether you really have any infestation or not with this dying branches, what's the best thing to do with those dead branches, if you will? Can you put them in like any of the yard, the yard bags, yard waste bags, and have them done to the city of Lakeville to pick up through here? Or is it something we have to haul off somewhere else to one of these sites?
So the question was, if you have some ash branches that have been removed or wood in your yard, what is the best practice for that? And so, Jennifer, I'm going to defer to you because I actually don't know what the sanitation companies who are hauling yard waste, I would assume they have to be hauling things in regulated areas or have a compliance agreement.
So from the state standpoint, it's by county level. You cannot leave the quarantined area with anything ash. So as long as the sanitation companies are staying in the area, they are not, they're following the regulations. Best management practices, I would say not to move it very far. If it's a company that comes and picks up your tree waste, if you can make sure that it goes as close to a location, a dump site, very close. If not, you can burn it in your property, have a little bonfire, invite your neighbors over, and then
Check the fire department.
Yeah.
To see if they have any restrictions at the time. Or,
Yep, check to make sure that there's no burning limitations. But if you can dispose of it on your property or the closest facility that would accept ash material, that will just help prevent the unnecessary spread faster of the insect. But as far as regulations are concerned, most companies are going to stay within known emerald ash borer areas.
So with that, we're going to end the formal presentation. We thank everyone for coming out on a cold, icy night. And if you have follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer those. I also have cards back on the table and some additional handouts you're welcome to. Thank you.